am a senior pre-construction manager out in the Phoenix office for the Arizona area. Here to talk today about really a tool that Ryan has, known as the Project Planning Meeting Agenda and Checklist. It is a really good tool. We're not going to have a ton of theory today. We're just going to kind of go through the tool. But this is really a tool that allows us to think of all the things we need to think about as we're kicking off a job. So we'll be kind of going over what the tool is today, why it is important, and then really the crux is just going through what's there and understanding what it contains as a great launch point and how we can use it and apply it going forward. I unmuted everybody because since we're going to be going through kind of a long meeting agenda that gets customized, it may be best to kind of discuss questions and observations as we go through it. So feel free to ask questions. What I would ask is that if you have a lot going on in your office or around you, if you wouldn't mind muting your phone directly, just because we're going to have a large number, potentially a decent-sized group on here, just kind of running some additional background noise. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the last slide. Then we'll get right into the tool. So what is the tool? It's a roadmap for kicking off a project, regardless of the project type. And I think that's, you'll see I bring up here again, this is a customizable tool to suit your project and suit your deal. It's a checklist to make sure all potential issues are discussed up front. Really, it's making sure we think of everything at the outset of the job, even if we don't have the answers, to get it put out there. So we're not just trying to execute on the things that are immediately in front of us. As I mentioned, it's customizable to every type of deal. It's customizable for a third-party hard bid, to a design build development deal, to a CMAR, to a consulting service, and internally and externally. And I bring that up because I've used it before when it's been with just internal to us in development. We've used it before with just the design team. We used it with everybody in the room, including a tenant or an owner. And I've used it on projects where I had one set up for the internal discussion and one set up for the external discussion. So it's just a good thing to go through and be comprehensive in thinking of our approach to the project. Some of the key things you want to be able to take away from the job, from using this, you want to walk out of it from this meeting and from utilizing this tool, establishes roles and responsibilities for the project. Now, if you guys are like Phoenix, I'm sure you guys have a lot of other tools you use for response. We have a big responsibility matrix that kind of gets down in the weeds of who's managing which trades or who's going to do this or that. I think the best thing to use this tool is this involves other parties. Who's going to be, and we'll touch on those roles as we go through it, but just be thinking broad. Who's going to get who's going to get this, who's going to get that, and then other examples we'll have as we go through the tool. Establish lines of communication. It's really important that we understand who's communicating with who, who's taking direct responsibility for communicating with the tenant, the city. And these, at the outset of the job, this tool is a great mechanism for establishing those initial roles and responsibilities. Establishes how the project will be administered. The simplest form of, yes, we're using ProLiant, and are we going to have one person or all 5 people on a project team inserting RFI? Just some of those real basic administrative level things that you want to figure out and establish day one, or at least have a concept day one and not figure it out as you go. Provides reminders of critical decisions that can and should be made early in the process. And then we've kind of alluded to it. It never hurts to plan or think about things too early. The purpose of this checklist planning agenda isn't necessarily to bring closure at that kickoff meeting, but it's definitely to get all those issues on the radar and some kind of a time plan so that you can get them resolved. So with that, just want to go in now and jump into it. Can everybody hear me? I'm actually getting a lot of background noise. I can go back and mute everybody, but can everybody hear me okay?
It could be weird that I was just completely
okay?
Yeah, Bill, we can hear you okay. It might be helpful to mute though because there is a lot of background.
All right, you know what? I'm going to go and mute everybody. I did want to make this a participant type thing, but we'll do that on the back end.
Yeah, I think that helps.
There we go. All right. Sorry, everybody. Thank you. Okay. So this is the crux of the presentation. It's a tool that's existing on the green. We can get the link out. It's and we'll just kind of start going on down through the line. We'll spare the obvious project name and date and all that, but what I want to really draw your attention to is this first matrix here, and I'm going to shrink this down to page view. This part of the tool is extremely important and allows to create really good responsibility management. This can be customized. I've done, and I'll show you one in a second here, where we actually created it from a responsibility standpoint between tenant, owner, contractor, team, design team members. So again, it shows the flexibility of this tool. But at the very least, when you start off with this, you can identify the roles and responsibilities, who reviews, who it's affecting, and what so on. One of the things we have done in our team meetings is once this matrix has been established, we left it on the cover for our team meetings, whether with a tenant, for the life of the team meetings, that this was always there to be reinforced what those roles and responsibilities are as we go through it. The example I'd like to show you, and it's been modified a little bit, is this right here, where we did a build-a-suit for Amcor. We put them in there, the owner developer and the representative of the design team, and we noted all those responsibilities, and this was at the front page of our team meetings for the life of pre-construction. So it's just a great tool that can really, again, establish that foundation. I think that's probably one of the most important things, is this tool is there to establish the foundation of how the project will be brought forth. So the next 5 pages of this tool, as I like to say, is an all-encompassing of all the issues that could be relevant as you are kicking off a job. And so this is where the customization and knowledge of your business deal and project come into play. So the first section here will talk about development. Obviously, if it's a third party, there's not a development to be speaking about. So while this is a great tool that can be taken off the shelf and used from a discussion standpoint, it still is a good idea to go through it to delete or add things that may be relevant to your specific project. First off, it's the deal summary. So as we talk about development, we need to know where we stand. What are the terms? Make sure everybody understands what the basis of the project is, especially when it's a development deal that involves all aspects of the Ryan value chain. What was sold? Hopefully it won't be an offend anybody here, but a lot of times we put things together in order to make the deal work. Maybe we have to tweak or modify things to get there. Reestablishing that so the expectations on all sides and what was represented are clear to everybody who's going to be involved in the project. We talk about reviewing an org chart. You may not have an org chart in every job. Simple jobs may have 1 or 2 PMs, but that's where we can confirm the team strategy and the roles. Confirm program. It sort of goes back to the deal summary, but what are we building? Now, if it's a hard bid, third party, this isn't as relevant, but some aspects are. What is our budget? What is our schedule? What is our scope? What are we achieving for? Again, thinking here is a great place when you launch this meeting to fill some of these areas out ahead of time and make sure that we all have a common understanding, and then update it at the end of the meeting as it's a memorialization of what the deal will become. Client understanding. Again, it's important to identify who the client is. Sometimes it is confusing when we have a development deal and we're dealing directly with the tenant. We all need to understand the value chain, the process of who all the stakeholders are. In some cases, in many cases, there are multiple stakeholders that we have to be very sensitive and aware of their requirements and needs. Then review the owner contract or lease as it's applicable. So again, that's the framework of the deal. Sometimes, in this case, we have to identify it. Many times I've had this meeting where that deal, that document isn't in place yet because we are beginning to move forward. So that brings the idea, well, what's our interim agreement? What do we have for indemnity? When do we need to get it signed? What type of structure does it need to be? Again, just laying the foundation for how the deal will be administered. The next section begins to deal with how we're going to administer the project. So first off, we still have Ryan Connect on there. I don't believe that is active anymore, but the idea behind it is it never hurts to reinforce the basics. Understanding who, what, and where is going to be going on what systems that we employ, and just reinforcing it. Even if it's a 2-minute conversation, it reinforces it, and it also forces a project manager as the leader to, work it through in their mind. Again, establish an initial plan. It's okay to change the plan later, but it's better than having no plan. It's a great time here, too, to insert the schedule. Now, I will say I appreciate how we say here the pre-construction or construction schedule. Whether you call it the development schedule, a time plan, that schedule that documents the whole process when you think about it from a design-build perspective. That encompasses design, city, and construction process, client interactions, budget approvals. The overall general time plan is what we're really trying to get at there. It can be the very detailed construction schedule if it's available at the appropriate time, but really here again, it's about that roadmap from the inception of the deal to the final completion. Meeting coordination. This is very important. Establish how you're going to work with your customer. Establish how you're going to work with your teams internally and externally during this session. Preparing sample agendas and what have you. Just essentially establish your protocol and responsibilities, even going down to who's going to run the meetings and who's going to be responsible for meeting minutes. Again, I know it's a redundant statement in this, but again, pre-planning all that out initially. And this is where where you can also establish what types of team building, visioning, value-added plans, kind of the one-time kickoff things that we do at the beginning of projects. Establish when those will occur, who should participate, and how they should be prepared. Then we can begin to get into, and this is where again it gets to be more customized based on deal to deal. We can go and break down the project based on its components. So you start off with the civil. Now, again, this comes down to what you know about your job. But let's say you're starting fresh. I mean, this is essentially almost a due diligence effort. What's the status of design? What do we know about the site? How are we going to approach the site? What's required? What are all its entitlements and city approvals required to get the job done? You're essentially identifying any roadblock that could prevent construction from occurring, and also assigning the responsibility and the roadmap to making sure it can be approached accordingly. With Section 4 of that is just a great checklist, and in these meetings, on the kickoff meetings, we will typically sit down with our due diligence checklist here, and the development person and I will sit across from the table and say, do we have this? No. Who's getting it? Who's got the topo? We have one, great. Geotech, who's got it? Let's get a proposal. Stuff like that. We go right on down the line. Now, grant you, many jobs, you won't have to do that portion of it, but because you'll already have it, but you may want to still go through this list to make sure you have everything. So just maybe a validation that you have everything and you're not missing anything on there as it may be applicable to your job. Then you get into the architectural structure and MEP design. The number one thing on here is the first question asked is, are we doing design? If we aren't doing design, it's still relevant to put in here to identify the teams and how we want to work together with them. Now, obviously, the detailed information here is written from a design-build perspective, and that'll be the focus. But even if we're not design-build, it's still good to walk through the requirements of this, as it only protects us and makes us much more informed of the status of the project and the decisions that need to be made. But as it relates to on the design-build job, first order of business is, who are the designers we're going to hire, if we haven't already? What is their scope of services going to be, and how they're going to be managed? The first thing you got to work out right off the bat. How are we going to partner on this if we're partnering with the design team, if we are leading the effort, and understanding what that approach will be. Understanding who will contract for who. Or is Ryan going to contract directly for all the design services, or are they going to be rolled up under another designer? All those strategies need to be worked out up front and clear, because there are multiple ways that it can be done. perhaps the most important thing about this is, though, getting it done early and tying it back to that timeline, because the manner in which you have handled this portion of the job establishes how you'll be able to achieve your timeline in getting to the construction phase. Programming. There's a lot of information here about what goes on in programming. And the methodology there is that Ryan has to be in the middle of all of it on a design-build job. That means we're there listening and helping lead and administer what the program requirements are from the client. Hear them, listen to them, execute what they want, and helping guiding the team to achieve that. It's okay to challenge their program. It's okay to hear them and say, but would this work as well? Because getting to the bottom line of that will also help you understand them better. You need to schedule the program activities. You need to lot out how much time is going to be needed and how do we get there. A lot of times when we're doing programming with a customer, they have multiple agencies. It involves multiple groups. We just flew back from Seattle last week on a pursuit, and it was very clear there was 3 different agencies that had 3 very distinct requirements all going into one building. Understanding those components and having that interaction is critical. From this, obviously, it dovetails into looking at alternatives. We have to really get the priorities out of the ultimate decision maker from the client and taking that on. Code implications, bid package strategy, touring their existing facilities all go into this because we need to be comprehensive. Even though we may not have black and white drawings, we need to understand the program in a comprehensive manner. We just spent a lot of time talking on the philosophy of programming, and this is kind of a kickoff agenda, a checklist thing, but those are the things you'll want to establish in a roadmap for the programming phase, because without an effective program, everything else in the design can be much more of a struggle. If you don't already have hard, steadfast design deliverables when you have this kickoff planning session, it's important to establish them at this meeting. Critical milestones with the various design deliverables, whether they relate to procurement, customer approval, city entitlement and approvals, all need to be identified from the outset, because that will establish a critical path where everybody's efforts need to be focused. And I want to reemphasize the procurement side of that. Many times the focus is city process, and we forget the fact that we may need to get that steel package at a DD stage to secure materials that are 18 weeks out or something along those lines. If the project hasn't been decided to go for lead or lead-friendly building, you need to have the conversation at this point just to put the wrapping, to put a closure to it. Whether it mean if it's very clear that it was required, then you verify that, and then you go through that preliminary scorecard and strategy at this meeting. If there hasn't been anything established and it's not a lack of, it's more of an issue of no answer, it's best you ask for it there. I'm sure we've all been there many a time when we're at the DD or starting construction documents, or even in construction when somebody says, what about lead? We might want to do this, and then it's a scramble effort. Establishing that objective clearly before too far down the line, if it's not initially addressed, is very important. Then the planning session has, some of the things that relates in this checklist for the project manager. The Gmp strategy. As I like to say, this is the point where we determine when do our numbers become hard? When are they locked in? And that goes back to ultimately understanding your business deal. Now, when you start this process and effort, that may not be known, but then it provides the precipitous to have that discussion and understand the tenure and the nature of the contract you're going to sign. That will then begin to prescribe the type of number and the trigger for when you will go to a GMP, or is it going to be a straight cost plus all the way through? It's very important that you understand that at the outset, knowing when the owner wants to lock in. And it's also very important on the external side and internal side as it relates to their financing. So all that factors into the discussion. Self-performing is definitely not something we see a lot in Arizona, but is definitely a factor in this effort that needs to be taken into consideration. as it relates into our overall fee and how it will be administered. Is it going to be administered as straight detailed cost, or will it be in a lump sum fashion as we would administer a subcontract for that work? Understand the project fee. We need to understand where our money is being made on it and where the other potential opportunities are. And it's good for the entire internal team to understand that so that they're aware of those as we go through the entire project effort. So, and then it brings up Gmp timing again. And I guess what I would add to that, this whole thing is, most of this may already be firmly established. If we're at a deal and kicking off a project, this very well should be established with the initial budgeting and estimating. So hopefully this is just a verification, these efforts here are just a verification of the work that's already been done. Procurement strategy. The first order of business is the first thing on there. It needs to be aligned with design. And design, this doesn't just apply to design build. Many times we're in the design assist mode, or we are a CMAR, or we are a contractor that's just kind of in the background for the customer. Either way, there's design being done, and we need to help drive that strategy to meet our schedule, meet the market, number of different things that are very important to hitting the market right with our procurement. And really our procurement strategy needs to make sure it also involves the field at this point. And I think it's very important to note that while we alluded to the overall project schedule before, it's important to be developing that overall construction schedule so we confirm with our field team exactly how we want the building built, and that can then play in that procurement strategy if we're doing phased design deliverables to that end. It's never too early to develop your bid list. Ideally, it gets done at the earliest stages so it can be openly discussed with the internal team, senior management, pre-construction managers, so that we have a firm pulse of what's going on with our current operations and what's going on with the marketplace. There is the ongoing discussions and however it relates to your market regarding negotiator design build and how it relates to your business deal. We are all doing, I know a number of our offices, including here in Phoenix, we're doing some work for UPS, and I know here locally they have some preferred vendors that we just go and negotiate with. And I know there's that as well probably with target projects. So just understanding those trades as it relates to both internally to Ryan and as it relates externally to our customer as well. At that point then you can begin the whole process of having all of the legwork done in terms of scheduling and the who and the when of the subcontractor procurement. The rest of the items on there speak more directly to when we're actually bidding, but what I will bring up is the meeby-weeby discussion. You know, it's obviously a priority and a program and an objective of Ryan's, but equally we have to be sensitive to our owner and know if there's a stated objective specific to the project. And that's very important as well to note at the earliest stages. Moving on, we will the interim agreement and the how-to. If you have an interim agreement, just establish an order. You know, you'll see in this checklist there's some repetition. It's just a reinforcement of knowing that where some of these responsibilities lie. Sorry if you haven't see it. I should have probably zoomed down a little bit more. Budget. This is a project management's time to reaffirm in the context of the business deal what we understand our budget to be to date and what the, most importantly, what the basis of that budget was based on either what program, design guidelines, or what have you. We need to look at how we develop that budget. Now, you know, this here talks about the earliest stages of the budget. Majority of the time that we've been using this tool as a project kickoff stage has been once we have the deal, but you can use this tool as well when we just have a concept project, and that's what speaks here to conceptual estimating and the various other budget model and the budget objectives. Most important, though, is taking the time at this stage, at the earliest stages, to make sure everybody has a common understanding of the budget, and that is based in a common understanding of what's included in that budget and what it's based on. We often find that when we're in pursuit and then going to kick off a job, there's that outer 10% that sometimes, oh, I thought you had this, or I didn't think you had, or I thought you had that. That common understanding at the early stages before we get knee-deep in design is very, very important. This is also a time of looking at the budget to consider our cost intelligence. How do we want to break it down? What's going to be valuable for us going back into our historical efforts, both in terms of sub-jobs, the old break out the garage separate from the building, and the TI, stuff like that. Establish those strategies at the outset of the job, and it'll make everything easier going forward, and there'll have to be no go back on those work efforts. You have to establish all your permitting requirements. And this is a little bit of a customized list here, but think of the oddities of your site. Think of the oddities of your owner. Think of your oddities of your location. Do we need a labor agreement? Do we need special use permits, conditional use permits? Just break it down and just ask the question. And even if they're all no, at least we know we won't get blindsided by knowing all the special nuances that may be required of the project. Again, if you're required to engage the owner in their requirements, here's the time you can do it as it speaks to owner-supplied subcontractors. Quality assurance requirements. Now, this goes into a lot of different lists. I think this is something that gets customized on each job. Again, go through the process and say, who are we going to need to contract for on-site testing? And what do we want based on the nature of the project, the risk of the project, and everything else, and what the owner may require as well. Then there's a full-blown risk analysis, and that is where I always like to bring in every aspect of our team all the way up through our VP to just present what we're talking about on the job, understanding where we're at, where the opportunities are, and where we also need to be concerned, so everybody has that common understanding and those sensitivities. This is just an initial list. You can make up a list of 20 on probably every project. The ones that I would say that you always need to speak to on every job on the risk analysis is schedule and budget. Some of these other ones may be viable on jobs, some of them may not, but I guarantee you there's a top 10 on every single project after you review schedule and budget. Then it comes down to special fees. And this is where it's very important that we work through these issues. In some cases, are they fees for the contractor, fees for the owner developer, fees for the tenant? It's just understanding what's entrenched with the project, what is there to be done with it. So again, we don't get to a point in time 3 months down the road and there's a check needed to be written that nobody was anticipating. Staffing concerns. I'm sure like everybody's very busy right now. I can't stress enough how this has to be discussed. And it may not be the permanent one. At the outset of every job, I always like to have a superintendent assigned, even if they're not sure he'll be the one building it, to get that input, to be that aid, to be that sounding board for good collaboration from the field perspective, and making sure we have adequate coverage on both the pre-con and the construction phase from the management side. Part of that, though, requires the team to be looking out for each other and being honest and understand what we think the real work effort will be. Many times that work effort is a lot more than we anticipate, and that's how we can get caught short with staffing. If nonprofit, so, that's a really good point. We do a lot of nonprofit work for people, and so it's important for us to understand, even with accounting, if we have to handle things differently. Are we using the time entry system because we're doing direct hourly billing of the management staff to the owner? All these things are important to be worked out. Property management, again, especially on design build, and most importantly on Ryan-owned and ultimately maintained facilities. Get their input, whether it be through the lead manager, the chief engineer, get that input. Aside from the benefits of the design and the benefit to the job, it provides quality to the project that makes it a better building, even if it's for a third party or a non-Ryan entity that owns the job. And this last thing here is, what's the owner's expertise? And, we probably could write a whole page on this issue, on this area. Understanding your client, understanding their sensitivities, understanding their priorities, understanding their objectives for doing the project so that, a lot of the efforts and decisions go back to those. It's just, I'd like to put that, as opposed to expertise, I like to say, a complete understanding of the owner allows us to make them that raving fan and being sensitive to that while still providing the overall service. So then we get into superintendent. Now, a lot of times when we're having these project planning and kickoff sessions, we probably don't know who the superintendent is. Sometimes, not, I can speak for Arizona, it's about 50% of the time. We usually have a good idea, but because things change, it may not be formally assigned. So in those cases, then have the field coordinator there. One of the things that our Brad Bear's been doing out here in Arizona is he has a couple of senior superintendents that are running jobs, but he will have them assigned to the early stages of kicked off projects that they may not run, but can provide that insight and expertise needed so that there's always a seat at the table. Labor issues, again, depending on whether or not you're self-performing or depending on whether or not it's a government job with a wage decision, they're all variables and factors in how big of an issue that needs to be addressed. Obviously, everybody in their respective hubs knows the priorities and knows the challenges that are faced with that. Quality assurance program. It's interesting. This can actually should be everywhere. It's also in the project management, but quite frankly, a quality assurance program can be prepared at the outset because it can also help guide the design process. So it's very important that it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily wait till the day you pull the permit. Now, this is where we talk about schedule. You said development of a construction schedule. This is the however many page, however many 100 or 1,000 line item schedule that is truly the detailed effort prepared and owned by the superintendent, and making sure that how that relates back to that overall schedule that does more of the tracking the design and the city entitlement process that is more on a global basis, and coordinating those two together is very, very important. A project-specific safety plan, you can't start that soon enough because as you do your procurement, it's great to include that in your procurement and buyout efforts. Reviewing all the general requirements. Again, these are all the things that go into procuring subcontractors by the project manager months before shovels are in the ground. So if you take that into consideration and getting the field input as it relates to those contracts is very important. Then it's coordinating that with the field, their staffing plan, general requirements budgets, where relevant, winter conditions, self-perform. Really what we're getting at here is a lot of times these numbers are known. A lot of times the numbers are set. If you're doing an open book or if you're doing a late GMP, then they're definitely a part of it. But the bottom line is there needs to be buy-in on not only what the budgets are, but then coming up with the plan to maintain and stay within or come under those budgets. Without that planning and dialogue up front, you can lose control of that and thus have overruns. And then continuing to go on with the project documents to make sure there's common understandings of how the site has to be approached. Again, this checklist isn't just for the meeting, it's a checklist to go through and make sure everybody's doing their part to get ready for the project. For the legal, on the legal side, a lot of times where the developer comes in, what's coming with the land. I believe we all been through that before, understanding our due diligence efforts with environmental reports, wetland studies, historical, endangered species, you name it. The bottom line is identify, that has to be identified up front. And quite frankly, if you're at a kickoff meeting or a planning session, you're going to design, you need to have resolved all this already, or at least know where the standing is and where it's going. If you're kicking off design, these are still open for discussion. It may already be too late. Then project assistant, obviously the most important thing there is making sure we not only get the job set up the way we need to get set up, but perhaps most importantly, how does this team want to run? How does this team want to set up? Who's going to do what? And everything else, especially getting more complex jobs with more people. Have that dialogue, and don't be afraid, as I always say, to make an initial decision to get started with. It can always be changed and evolved, and don't be afraid to trial it out versus just kicking it down the road and figuring it out as we go. This is our opportunity early on to establish work efforts and modify accordingly. But obviously, we all know what goes into kicking off a job and just getting again, this is a great example of the foundation, making sure all the templates and documents are locked in early on. There's no reason to wait on it. That encompasses the document. What I would like to do now is I'm going to unmute and take any questions and discussions and tactics that have been taken. Before because again, this is a tool that is meant to be customized and used by all, and not meant to act as a roadblock or rigid in any particular manner. So with that, I open it up to the floor.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we'll have to make whatever work. So,
Anybody have anything they want to add?
all right, great.
Bill, this is Andy. I think this was a good presentation. So,
Yeah,
typically,
I actually just got
everybody does the meeting together.
just got to do a background
or you do it in
sign
segments.
guy after you revise some design.
I found the culprits, Andy. Go ahead.
All right. So have you guys found it's better just to get everybody together when you go through and do it all at once, or do you meet with the design team first or development team, or what have you found works best?
Well, I think that's the thing we got to remember with this tool, in my opinion, is pardon the phrase because it makes it sound bad, but this template is a dumping ground of pretty much everything. So it depends on your team. The last time I used it, we had a very involved tenant on a development deal with an architect we'd been partnered up with to land the deal for 8 months. So it just made sense to get everybody in the room together. The one thing we left out there was any of the land-related stuff that we did on the side with development. But everything else was just we knew they were going to be an active tenant, was just a big kumbaya session, you know. I do think if it's a full-service Ryan deal, you should always do an internal one with the development team and, you know, make it a living document. You work it out with the development team first and, you know, and your internal construction team, and then maybe go public so we're all on the same page as one Ryan. But read read your customer, read your deal. I think that's the thing I'd like to bring to it. I think it's safe to say in 2014, never more than before are we seeing a more array of deals, whereas pre-recession, it seemed like a lot of, at least we're out here in Arizona, the nature and structure of our deals were very repetitive. That's no longer the case, so we need to take that into consideration as we kick off.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
The one thing we'll do is, we will get a link out to, I'll find out from Morgan if this session tracks participants, and we can send a link out on this. But it is on the green. Just, you know, check it off. It is a bit of a confusing document because it is not confusing. It is redundant. It says meeting agenda and checklist, and so I mean you can start off with just as it is and go to a meeting, or you can make it your own. I suggest making it your own because, you know, like I showed you on this other one. And this is actually the project we were talking about. They were concerned having us do FF&E and be hands-on. You know, we were able to identify the players and identify who's responsible, who reviews. You know, it kind of lets everybody know the rules of the road and who cares about what in many ways. So I just think that's, you know, and like I said, we chose to keep this matrix on the cover of every owner meeting all the way up to building permit. And this list can be modified. You know, and everything else. So, does anybody have anything else?
Thanks. Good stuff.
Well, if not, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.